todos. Bienvenidos a nuestra reunión mensual del Comité Directivo de la Comunidad Fronteriza. Welcome to our monthly meeting for the International Border Community Steering Committee. I want to provide interpretation instructions. I'm going to do this in English and Spanish. Voy a dar instrucciones para acceder a los servicios de interpretación. Lo voy a hacer primero en inglés y después en español. To access interpretation tonight, if you're joining us from an iPad or tablet, please feel free to click on the 3 dots on the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And from there, you're going to choose language interpretation. And from those options, then select the language of your preference, either English or Spanish. If you're an English speaker, make sure that you're on the English channel. If you're joining us from a computer, please locate the icon at the bottom of your screen in the form of a globe. And then from there, you can select English or Spanish, depending on your language. If you're an English speaker, please select English. If you're joining us from a smartphone, then you can also just locate the 3 dots on the upper right-hand corner of your screen, select language interpretation, and from there, select English if you're an English speaker. I'm going to go ahead and provide these instructions in Spanish. Si esta noche nos está acompañando a través de su tableta o iPad, por favor localice los 3 puntos que están en la parte superior derecha de su pantalla y haga clic ahí. Después le va a aparecer la opción de Language Interpretation de una lista. Puede hacer clic ahí y enseguida escoja inglés o español, dependiendo del idioma de su preferencia. En este caso, si usted habla español, escoja el idioma Spanish o español. Si nos está acompañando desde su computadora, favor de localizar el icono con forma de globo en la parte inferior y de ahí puede seleccionar la opción de inglés o español, dependiendo de su idioma. En este caso, para los que hablan español, pueden seleccionar Spanish o español. Si nos acompaña desde su teléfono inteligente o smartphone, puede igualmente localizar los 3 puntos que están en la parte superior derecha de su pantalla. De ahí tiene que seleccionar Language Interpretation del menú. Y enseguida puede seleccionar su idioma de preferencia. En este caso, para los que hablan español, favor de escoger Spanish. The interpreters should be available on the different channels. So if you chose your channel correctly, you should be listening to my message in English and also being interpreted into Spanish. Thank you very much. And again, welcome tonight. We have a very good agenda, and I'll turn it over to Monique.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Welcome. It was really great to see many of you in person last month, and we certainly missed folks who weren't able to make it, but glad that you're able to be here today. Before we get started, I just want to do a quick roll call just to make sure folks, we have folks from the CSC here. Manuela, I think I saw you. Manuela?
Sí, aquí presente.
Perfecto, gracias.
Gracias.
Olga. Okay. Wendy.
Presente.
Bienvenidos. Rudy.
Gracias.
Rudy. Okay. Juan Miguel. Okay. Jason. Jason, I know that we see some people. I'm going to go ahead and promote to panelist. Mariano.
Present.
Right. Welcome, Mariano. Alejandro. Stan.
Present.
Okay, good to see you, Stan. Leslie.
Here.
Hey, Leslie. Jenny.
Present.
Good to see you, Jenny. Diane.
I'm here.
Hi, Diane. Shelby.
Hi.
I'm here. Hello.
Yeah, good to see you today. Irma.
Presente.
Presente. Bienvenidos, Irma.
Gracias.
Chris. Janet. Okay. Maria. Okay. Marie. Mauricio. Guadalupe. I see Alejandro just joined. Welcome, Alejandro. Maricela. Okay. David. Okay. Trinidad. Okay. Lee.
Here.
All right, Dr. Lee's here. Great. Elsa. Okay. Maritza. And we've got Zach.
Here, presente. Thank you.
Hey, Zach, good to see you. And Mariela. All right. Well, if those others join in, please let me know in the chat box if you can, if you see one of your colleagues join in as well. Well, thank you all. Welcome this evening. We certainly have a full agenda as always. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if that's okay with folks. Let me just make this larger here. Can everybody see that okay? All right, great. So, perfecto, gracias. All right, so I want to provide just a quick overview on what to expect this evening. We are gaining really great momentum in terms of having a draft community air monitoring plan that you've heard about last week and potentially had the chance to review last week as well. But we are also, I'm excited to have Randy from Air Pollution Control District here today to talk about the research that they've been doing around an indirect source rule, which is specifically around, how to reduce air emissions from places like warehouses. So trucks coming in and out of warehouses, which we know is an issue that you've all identified that's a priority issue. So we're going to hear from Randy from APCD to share a little bit more about some background research that they've been doing and where they are in that process. We're also going to continue our conversation from last month. We started to talk about developing subcommittees based upon different areas of interest. So we're going to continue that conversation tonight, share with folks who maybe weren't here last time what was developed in those small breakout groups, but also work with you all to start to identify, how often these groups will meet, when these subcommittees will meet as well. So working out the logistics so that we can get those subcommittees started. We're also, as a request by you all, we're going to have actually Domingo present tonight on some community emission reduction program, CERP, strategies that the Portside community, so the communities of Barrio Logan and National City, have implemented that could potentially be strategies that you all might also want to consider as part of your own CERP development as well. So what are some transferable strategies and that we're learning from Portside that could also potentially apply to the international border? So Domingo will be providing that presentation. And then David on our team and myself will be also just providing another opportunity for folks to comment on the draft community air monitoring plan itself. And I'll also be sharing with you all a resource that we were able to develop to make navigating the camp much easier and more community friendly as well. We'll also have some times for public comments and closing remarks in terms of next steps. And then by that time, it should be close to 7 o'clock. And we've hopefully been able to accomplish a lot during our time together. So with that, I want to first transition to just general updates. And I know that Zach from Sandag also wanted to provide some general updates in terms of when we met virtually a couple months ago. we had a really great discussion about heavy duty vehicles. And you all came up with a list of questions regarding heavy duty vehicles and information we would need to know in order to be better grounded in understanding the issue so that we can then collectively come up with some strategies. So Zach has a little bit of an update for us that I'm going to actually turn it over to Zach. Zach, if you're ready, you can share.
Yeah, thanks, Monique. Yeah, I don't have any like visual material to go along with this, just kind of a verbal update or a heads up to the group more than anything. But yeah, as Monique was saying, we touched base, APCD, SANDAG, and Caltrans a few days ago just to talk about maybe coordinating and pulling together a presentation for a future agenda that kind of speaks to both what agencies, SANDAG and Caltrans representing a lot of the kind of regional responsibility for transportation here in the region and the border region, obviously. What we know just based on previous studies or research or data about what the binational and border dynamic means in terms of mobility and transportation, the volumes of crossings occurring through the border, emissions of different air pollutants stemming from the delay that's occurring at the ports of entry, and share some info on, what public agencies like SANDAG and Caltrans and others and our partners are doing to improve mobility in the border region through various projects, hopefully some of which you're familiar with, programs, et cetera, everything from public transit improvements and mobility hubs and new ports of entry to commercial vehicle infrastructure improvements, vehicle technology improvements, zero emission vehicle infrastructure improvements, et cetera. It's a really broad list. In fact, just today I sat down with a couple colleagues to brainstorm a little bit, and we have a bulleted list that kind of spanned a whole page and even went to a second. But just to say, at a future agenda, we're going to be presenting hopefully something really succinct, but that helps the group kind of understand what we know about the current situation, the border dynamic, what that means in terms of emissions and air quality impacts, and also maybe some inspiration for later down the line when we get to compiling like recommendations and strategies, et cetera, finding some alignment with a lot of the projects and policies and programs that we're already working on. So yeah, I think that's kind of just a quick summary of what you can expect at a future agenda, but just wanted to mention that so people are aware.
Thank you so much, Zach. And also Zach, is being really humble because he and his team are doing a lot of work in terms of researching many of the answers to the questions you all had, and he's doing his best to kind of compile that so that we can share that back with the group as well, and also in terms of his effort in helping coordinate it, as well as Diane from Caltrans, bringing in the right people into the room to make sure that we have the information we need to do this work in a collaborative way. So thank you so much, Zach. I'm going to go ahead and go back to my screen here. Right. Another update we did want to share with you all. I know this is a lot of text, but we also have the slide deck already up on the website, and I can show you in just a second where to navigate that if you want to kind of follow along as well on your own. But we wanted to provide an update on this. The Air Pollution Control District, APCD, just learned about this proposed legislation last week. This is being proposed by Representative David Alvarez, who represents the border region here. This kind of caught our attention because of what it's seeking to do. Essentially, the bill is saying that actually, I'll just read this section because it is a lot to kind of unpack, but well, I'll just highlight a few things. So it'll prohibit any regulations requiring a transition to zero emission heavy duty trucks if essentially the state of California is unable to prove that there is essentially adequate infrastructure available to support that particular transition. This came to our attention just because we know that the California Air Resources Board, along with many communities across the state, have been working throughout the years to implement a zero emission vehicle policy and supporting the transition of heavy duty trucks to zero emission vehicles. This legislation is in terms of the boundaries, it's just around the California-Mexico border, what they're calling a commercial zone. So we know that it could have potential direct impacts to the communities of San Isidro and Otay Mesa specifically. The APCD board last week when they met, they did take a position on this. They stated they voted to oppose this bill unless later amended, because as it stands right now, from our perspective, it could really deeply impact environmental justice communities, particularly here the border community, and if we do not transition to cleaner vehicles here, in this case zero emission vehicles. But Domingo, I don't know if you want to add any more background or context for folks, but we just wanted to make sure we had this on folks' radar, just so that folks are aware of legislation that's being proposed at the moment.
Yes, thank you, Monique. I appreciate it. Absolutely, this is something that we have a lot of concerns with, because it's contrary to our goals of seeing more zero emission vehicles on the roads. And it's something that it's particularly important to environmental justice communities, especially this community in the border region. However, like Monique said, our board not only provided that direction to oppose the bill if not amended, but we also have a more comprehensive legislative program that dictates all of the different legislation that we as an air district will be supporting. And even if the bill is amended, if it still doesn't comply with our legislative program, which supports the transition to zero emission vehicles, we wouldn't be supporting this bill. Having said that, I know that the author's office is currently in conversations with a number of agencies. We learned that they are meeting with the state this week, and we're hoping to meet with them in the coming weeks as well, to talk a little bit more about what would be a good way to modify this bill in a way that supports the deployment of zero emission technologies, especially in environmental justice communities like this one. So we will certainly continue to keep you posted on this, but again, just something important to have on everybody's radar.
Yeah, and I see a few hands up. Let's go to Chris, Jenny, and I think I saw Alejandro's hand up too. So if you want to chime in too, but we'll go Chris, Jenny, and then Alejandro.
Yeah, I'm just a quick thought. Even if this bill were to pass as is, we'd still see a huge increase in zero emission trucks at the border crossing, just because a lot of the larger transportation companies, CalMex, Valley Express, Crown, they go to the Port of Long Beach, and the Port of Long Beach is going to require zero emission vehicles despite this law beginning on the 1st of January 2024. So these huge companies that are crossing will still be required to go zero emission despite this. I also wanted to comment that TruckNet were the first retail truck stop in California to implement retail chargers for Class 8 trucks, DC fast chargers at 250 kilowatts. So just FYI for everyone.
Yeah, thanks for that background info, Chris. Very helpful. Jenny.
I just want to make a comment that the language in the second to last sentence uses the word feasible, economically feasible.
Right.
And taking on lessons from occupational health, OSHA, which is the agency that regulates occupational standards, has that something has to be feasible is written into OSHA law, and that has prevented them for years from really passing anything. When the benzene standard, when it was clear that benzene caused leukemia, all these companies testified it wasn't feasible. They couldn't possibly meet the standard. Sorry. But when the data came in and they were forced to really lower it, then suddenly the companies all magically met it. So the feasible is a very dangerous word, and there's a lot of history of how that can be misused. That's all. Thank you.
No, thanks for elevating that, and we'll certainly keep that in mind in terms of like our conversations as well with the representative. Alejandro.
Yeah, I was gonna say something very in tune with what Jenny was saying, where like you know, where there's a will, there's a way, and it seems that this bill is completely just putting profits on top of human health and environmental health as well. So thank you for elevating the bill, and thank you to the board of APCD for opposing it.
Yeah, thanks, Alejandro. Right. Okay, so we're gonna move on from this. I know Domingo, I know we've been working behind the scenes trying to get the contract set up for the stipends. I was wondering if you had a quick update that you can share with folks where we're at with that.
Sure, thank you. Just very quickly, last time I shared that the contract was being reviewed by our council. It was already approved internally by APCD. It's currently with the county's Department of Purchasing and Contracting. And the subsequent step there is for them to send it over to our contractor for them to then agree to the terms of that contract. So that's where we're at in the timeline. We've had some preliminary conversations with the contractor, just alerting them of what's coming so that, you know, they're prepared to move as quickly as possible. And we're hoping that this is really just, it's on the last stretch of the process. So we're hoping that pretty soon we'll be able to start distributing the stipends to the community residents that are voting members of the steering committee. And just as a reminder, we've been tracking attendance so that we can make those payments retroactive.
Awesome, thanks, Domingo. Chris, did you have another question or comment, or just the hand is up from the previous?
Oh, I think that's from the previous. I apologize.
Okay, no worries, no worries.
Virtual stretch.
Yeah, no worries. I also put in the chat box for folks the slide deck that we'll be using tonight. What will also be, Randy will also be sharing another slide deck that I could put in the chat box when he's about to go up, just in case you want to follow along, or if the text is a bit too small when I'm sharing my screen as well. So at this time, this is all we have in terms of general announcements. Folks can share other announcements during public comments and things that aren't part of the agenda as well. So we'll have some time later on as well if you all have any other announcements you'd like to share. I want to go ahead at this time, turn it over to Randy, who will be sharing some research on the indirect source rule that they've been looking into and where they're at in the process. Randy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Monique. I'll go ahead and share my screen just a moment here. Oh, Monique, am I able to have that capability?
Let me double check here. Let me.
I think you might need to make him co-host.
Oh, okay. I just changed the settings, so you should be able to do that, but I'll also make you co-host as well, just as a backup.
Alrighty.
There you go.
Thank you. Monique, can you see the screen okay?
Yep, it looks great. Thanks, Randy.
Great, thank you. All right, well, good evening, everyone. I'm Randy Consolation, Associate Engineer in the Rural Development section at the district. Joining me today is Nick Cormier, Supervisor of Rural Development, along with other district staff. Excuse me. This presentation will provide an informational update on the evaluation of a potential indirect source rule, or ISR. What is an indirect source? The Clean Air Act defines an indirect source as a facility, building, structure, installation, real property, road, or highway, which attracts or may attract mobile sources of pollution. Assembly Bill 423 directs the district to consider adopting an indirect source rule to address pollution from mobile sources that are associated with stationary sources, such as ports, warehouses, and distribution centers. The following diagram shows the main phases of the typical rule development process that occur when a new rule or rule amendment is considered. For this ISR effort, rulemaking staff is currently working on the background phase shown in green and highlighted. Today's presentation is a summary of this initial research to date. The process begins with the background phase, which includes conducting extensive research, such as reviewing relevant documents, for example, the California Health and Safety Code, regulations from EPA, CARB, and other California air districts, identifying the affected sources, evaluating possible control options, and calculating baseline emissions, potential emission reductions, and cost effectiveness, gathering input from various stakeholders through site visits, meetings, or work groups. Based on the results of all this research, the feasibility of moving forward with a rule proposal is determined based on technological feasibility, cost effectiveness, or emission reduction potential. If the proposal is deemed feasible, the next phase is when the rulemaking staff develops and finalizes the draft rule language and solicits additional input from stakeholders by conducting one or more workshops. A workshop report is then prepared addressing all comments and questions raised at the workshop, and the report is distributed. In the following phase, rulemaking staff will finalize a socioeconomic impact assessment, SIA, if needed, as well as perform a California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, review. For more complex proposals, it may be necessary to hire a third party to assist with data and information gathering to complete these documents. During the final phase, a board letter package is prepared and submitted to the governing board for consideration of adoption of the proposal. The length of time the rule development process takes will vary depending on the complexity of the rule proposal. For example, a straightforward amendment of an existing rule may take up to 1 year to complete. Historically, the district has mostly developed and adopted rules to control ozone precursors such as nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds. After rule adoption, any future amendments would start another rule development process. Legal authority and limits. The California Health and Safety Code provides the district with the primary authority to control air pollution from all sources except emissions from motor vehicles, adopt rules to meet state and federal air quality standards, and reduce or mitigate emissions of air pollution from indirect sources. However, there are legal limits to the district's authority. Local. Cannot interfere with local city or county control over land use decisions. State. California's Proposition 26. Any fee component in a rule cannot be a tax or improper regulatory fee. Federal. An indirect source rule needs to consider areas of federal preemption in which federal law preempts state or local law. For example, per the Clean Air Act, a local air district cannot adopt a motor vehicle emission standard, or per the Federal Aviation Administration Authorization Act, cannot relate to price, routes, or service of motor carriers. The district will be evaluating two types of pollutants from these indirect sources: nitrogen oxides, NOx, and diesel particulate matter, DPM. When NOx and volatile organic compounds, VOC, are emitted by different types of sources, such as vehicles or off-road equipment, they chemically react under the influence of sunlight and heat to form ozone pollution. The concentration of ozone pollution is as dependent on the sunshine and temperature as it is on the presence of ozone-forming emissions. This ozone is harmful to breathe and therefore is regulated as an air pollutant. Ozone irritates and inflames the air passageways. Other health impacts include headache, cough, shortness of breath, and chest tightness when taking a deep breath. Elevated exposures to ozone can also affect sensitive vegetation and ecosystems, including forests, parks, wildlife refuge, and wilderness areas. Diesel particulate matter, DPM. Short-term health effects include irritation to the eyes, nose, throat, and lungs, cough, headache, and nausea. Long-term effects include lung cancer, bladder cancer, worsened allergies, asthma attacks, and lung illnesses, and heart disease. This ISR effort involves identifying warehouse activities and associated truck visits that contribute to emissions of air pollutants. Specifically, trucks use various fuels or power sources, including diesel fuel, the combustion of which create NOx and DPM emissions. Gasoline also emits NOx and particulate matter. Compressed natural gas, CNG, emits lower NOx in comparison to gasoline and no DPM emissions. In addition, combustion of diesel, gasoline, and CNG produce greenhouse gas, GHG emissions. And finally, battery, electric, or hydrogen fuel cells. These type of technology produce no tailpipe smog causing or GHG emissions. As mentioned in an early slide, AB 423 requires that warehouses and distribution centers be considered for a potential indirect source rule. For simplicity, the term warehouses will be used to mean both warehouses and distribution centers in this presentation. The map shows approximately 6,700 total warehouses ranging in size from less than 1,000 to 3.3 million square feet located throughout San Diego County. The location of the warehouses shown in black, and the portside and international border communities shaded in red. At this time, it is not known how many of these buildings are conducting warehousing activities resulting in indirect source emissions. Further research is needed to develop a more accurate warehouse inventory. Preliminary baseline indirect source emissions for all 6,700 warehouses are estimated to be over 1,100 tons per year NOx and 11 tons per year diesel PM. For comparison, the total region-wide NOx emissions in San Diego County are estimated at 25,500 tons per year, and total region-wide diesel PM 2.5 emissions are 255 tons per year. Warehouse indirect source emissions account for 4% of the total region-wide NOx emissions and 4% of the total region-wide diesel PM 2.5 emissions. This map shows a zoomed-in image of the international border area shaded in red, and about 61 warehouses with 100,000 square feet floor area or more located within the international border area as shown in yellow. A warehouse size threshold of 100,000 square feet is consistent with that of South Coast Air Quality Management District Warehouse Rule 2305. These 61 warehouses represent 0.9% of the San Diego region's total warehouse inventory. For comparison, the South Coast Air Quality Management District, which is the agency responsible for the Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties, has more than 3,300 warehouses with 100,000 square feet or more floor area located within their jurisdiction. Preliminary baseline indirect source emissions from these warehouses are estimated to be 109 tons per year of NOx and 0.8 tons per year diesel PM. While the warehouses in this area represent less than 1% of the San Diego region's total warehouse inventory, they account for about 10% of total indirect source emissions from all regional warehouses. For warehouses with 50,000 square feet or more floor area, there are 68 additional buildings between 50 and 100,000 square feet floor area. These warehouses are shown in orange. In total, these 129 warehouses with 50,000 square feet or more floor area represent 2% of the region's total warehouse inventory. Preliminary baseline indirect source emissions for these warehouses are estimated to be 137 tons per year NOx and 1 ton per year diesel PM. This represents about 12% of the total indirect source emissions from all regional warehouses. Lowering the warehouse size threshold to 50,000 square feet would regulate an additional 2% of the emissions. If we look at all the warehouses in the international border community, 400 warehouses are in Otay Mesa and 28 are in San Ysidro, or 7%. The following are some control strategies that may be considered in an ISR for warehouses. The acquisition of low NOx or zero emission ZE trucks, low NOx or ZE truck visits, ZE yard trucks acquisition or use, ZE charging or fueling infrastructure, which include electric charging or hydrogen station installation and use, solar panel system installation and use, air filtration systems, which would be installed at sensitive receptors within some distance from a warehouse, and a mitigation fee, which may be used to provide incentives toward the purchase of low NOx and ZE trucks, as well as charging and fueling infrastructure. To date, the district has conducted meetings with 36 stakeholders to elicit feedback as district staff evaluates potential indirect source measures. The following are some key comments received. The district should consider land ports of entry as an indirect source. Due to the complexity of land ports of entry, further research and evaluation by district staff will be needed. Consider warehouses smaller than the South Coast Rule 2305 threshold of 100,000 square feet. Varying perspectives on requirements for low NOx versus ZE technologies, technological feasibility and availability of potential control strategies, including cost and infrastructure, codifying indirect source emission reduction requirements in a rule may limit access to federal and state incentive funding, and evaluate current and upcoming mobile source CARB regulations to avoid duplicative requirements. Next steps. District staff efforts to continue the evaluation of possible indirect source measures will include, but is not limited to, the following. Continue to conduct one-on-one meetings with various stakeholders, for example, the environmental, industrial, and goods movement sectors. Refine limits of the district's legal authority to regulate indirect sources, including land ports of entry. Refine emission estimates and reductions. Calculate cost effectiveness for various control options that could be implemented as part of a potential indirect source rule. Evaluate CARB's various ongoing mobile source rulemakings to determine areas of potential overlap. For example, the Advanced Clean Fleets Rule, currently under development, will require medium and heavy-duty ZE trucks by 2045 or earlier. Develop rule concepts based on district staff research and stakeholder input, and evaluate district resources needed for ongoing development and future implementation of an indirect source program. In addition, district staff will continue to engage with stakeholders and conduct public informational meetings or work groups for additional input. District staff plans to return to the governing board to provide a status update in June 2023. And this concludes the presentation. We are available to answer any questions, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Randy. I know that this is definitely a source of interest for many folks here. Love to see maybe folks want to start raising their hand, getting in the queue to ask any questions. I just put the presentation you just saw in the chat box in case you want to scroll back to any of the slides as well. Let's go with Jenny.
Hi, I just had a question to educate myself. Sorry. When you're calculating emissions from a warehouse, do you calculate kind of when their trucks are there idling around it and emitting from that kind of direct area, or do you account like how do you calculate what belongs to that warehouse in terms of emissions?
Right. So we basically tried to do our best. As I had mentioned earlier in the presentation, South Coast, which is the area district immediately north of us, adopted their warehouse rule, which applies to warehouses that are 100,000 square feet and above. So they came up with their emission estimates. So we kind of use those numbers to kind of using floor area as a proxy in order to calculate emissions for San Diego. And we, as part of those emission calculations, it does include idling in addition to distance traveled to and from a particular warehouse. But they had to use values, like average values kind of across the board. It wasn't done on a case-by-case, very specific basis, because there's so many that they had to consider in their calculations. So they did it a best approach, and we use those estimates to calculate our estimates, which I presented today.
Great, thank you so much.
Let's go to Chris next.
Randy, on my past conversations in relation to the indirect source rule, I've been told that CNG was actually going to be exempt. There's going to be more targeting diesel than CNG. Is that still the case?
Oh, is your, I'm sorry, just so that I understand your question, Chris, is the aim of the indirect source rule to target diesel type of equipment? Is that your question?
Yeah, that was my understanding in the past, based off of conversations that I had, that the goal was to really penalize warehouses for bringing in diesel trucks, and that the CNG truck would not be penalized. It would not be part of this indirect source rule.
That would be the intent, to move towards cleaner technology. South Coast, in their particular rule, does have an option within their selection, their menu of items for control technologies to include CNG, low NOx, in addition to ZE, recognizing that it will take time for ZE trucks to be more widely available in the market. So that's why that option is there. So it's definitely something that we would be considering.
Okay, yeah, I agree 100% with that determination, just because of some of the range limitations right now with the pure electric vehicles. CNG is a really good option for those longer range requirements that some companies have that would, reduce emissions substantially. So thank you for that.
Yeah, any other questions for Randy? This is definitely not the last time as well, right? That we'll be engaging in this conversation, given that warehouses is a source of importance to this community. So Nick.
Yeah, really quick question. I apologize if there's noise in the background, but I'm curious to know if at any point the CSC could be given kind of like the raw data about the warehouses in the community. So I believe there was on the presentation, it said that there was, let's say, like 61 warehouses of a certain size, and then there's a breakdown of the different sizes. I'm concerned about accuracy, and I think it'd be really important to maybe ground proof. There may be locations that may not fit the parameters of what maybe that data set's looking at as far as it saying it's a warehouse. There might be some smaller warehouses in San Isidro that aren't being counted. So yeah, I'm just curious if that would be released out to the public at any point.
Randy, I can try and answer that one. Thank you, Nicholas. I think this is something that we did ask our council about to see if we can release that data. We did procure that data from a third-party source that handles commercial and real estate transactions. I can't recall the answer at the moment of where she landed on that. I do think, and I can't find the email at the moment, but if you give me a few minutes, I can potentially drop it in the chat if there is an answer that we can share today on whether we can provide that data in a public setting, or if it might have to be like a Public Records Act or something like that. So if you give me a few minutes, I can look that up. But I do want to call out that in terms of the data that we were showing in just the few slides that were specifically focused on the border area, we were looking at just the warehouses that were above 50,000 square feet threshold. So we aren't trying to hide that there are more warehouses in and around the community. However, that is what at least the slide was showing, was that it didn't show everything, and given the fact that South Coast rule currently is set at 100,000 square foot threshold, that is why we're looking at that particular range at the moment. But we are mindful that there's a lot of warehouses that are well below the 100,000 square foot level in the county. So I hope that answers your question, but I can try to find that response from our council in a minute here, if you give me just a second.
Yes, thanks so much, Nick, and thanks so much, Nick. Let's see, I see Magdalena.
Sí, gracias por esta presentación. Me da un montón de, creo que nos da mucha información sobre la frontera y de alguna manera nos puede ayudar a imaginar del lado mexicano con todos los almacenes tienen la misma razón de ser que los de Otay, ¿cuál es el problema? O sea, a interpretar. Pero también mucho se me escapa. Mucho se me escapa de esta presentación y creo que tal vez a las demás compañeras y compañeros de la comunidad necesitamos como una sesión casi interpretativa de esta presentación para entender más cómo es que nos afecta lo que pasa a raíz de la dinámica que atraen los almacenes o en el lado de Tijuana la maquiladora, la dinámica del transporte. Era todo.
Thanks, Magdalena. We weren't able to hear the translation in English, so I'm wondering if we can get kind of a summary of what Magdalena.
Sí. ¿Yo?
Oh. So I'm wondering maybe Domingo, if you caught that, if you'd be able to provide the summary.
I'm
No
sorry,
se escucha.
I'm not sure that I would be able to summarize, but I
Yeah.
believe maybe Magdalena, are you on the English channel? Magdalena, ¿está en el canal de inglés o español? Creo que está en el de inglés. En el de español.
My understanding was that Magdalena was asking for a session to sort of explain better to her how the issues in the trucking industry, trucking in Mexico, Tijuana, how this indirect source rule is going to help on both sides of the border, was my understanding.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like I mentioned before, I think this is going to be one of many conversations with the CSC, and we'll certainly this particular committee will certainly be tracking as this rule goes. Well, first, a similar presentation is going to go before the board with additional research that Nick and Randy and their team will be doing in June. So we'll be tracking that as well. And then the board will then give direction, hey, let's move forward with actually developing an indirect source rule. And this committee, I think, is going to be very instrumental in helping inform what that rule is going to ultimately look like if the board does give direction in June to move forward. Randy, I have one kind of, and I kind of asked this question before the meeting too. Let me just remove the spotlight here. The question I have is, in one of the slides, you had mentioned that for warehouses that are 100,000 square feet and more, in kind of the boundaries of this particular AB 617 community, constitutes only 0.9, so not even a percent, 0.9% of the inventory in all of San Diego, but constitutes 10% of total emissions from all warehouses. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts in terms of why that might be the case, particularly within this community. And I guess it's more assumptions, right? Because we don't know exactly why, but I'm curious to understand why the level of emissions compared to the amount of inventory.
Right. Well, thank you, Monique, for that question. Right now, it's rather difficult to kind of extract that level of detail in terms of making conclusions because we're limited by the data set. So all we have we know the warehouses. We don't know what activity there is being conducted at the building. So we're assuming this is a warehouse. We know the size, we know the location, but in terms of the dynamics of the movement of the trucks, that is beyond what the data is telling us, or we don't have access to that data. So the best that we can say from the information that we have is that you have a high concentration within this particular area that have large warehouses. And it makes sense because you have close proximity right across the border, goods coming in and out. They are dropped off to these warehouses to, later be distributed to throughout the county and elsewhere. So it makes sense that you'll see that rise in emissions in comparison to the rest of the county. Whether or not that's my gut feel. That's kind of what makes sense. But in terms of getting actual numbers from the data, it's hard because we're, again, as I mentioned before, we're very limited by what we have at the moment.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that context in terms of what data is accessible and available at the moment. Nick, did you want to add to that as well?
I can, but I was mostly wanted to follow up with Nicholas's question. So whenever we're good with that.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So we did find, our council did weigh in on this topic about the release of that data from CoStar, and we are able to release that data. However, our council does want to review any release data before it does go out, just to make sure that we're not releasing information that we shouldn't. So, that is something that we could potentially bring, a broader data set to this committee, at a later date, so that we can, share the full breadth of information that we have at our disposal. So we will be, in touch with you in the future if that's requested.
Thank you, Nick. And then Chris will be our last question or comment on the subject. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, just a quick question. So Amazon has the largest warehouse by far in Otay Mesa. Say that they in a month solely had zero emission trucks picking up product from their warehouse. How do they go about reporting that or exempting themselves from a penalty since they only used zero emission vehicles at their warehouse?
Yeah, so South Coast rule requires reporting. So they have to keep track, any given warehouse that's subject to South Coast rule have to keep track of their truck trips in a given year. And that's all reported to the South Coast District. And so they're basically trying to calculate their what's called a points obligation. And they choose, as I was mentioning before, options, control options, whether it's lower, cleaner trucks or solar panels or charging infrastructure, those types of measures to meet those points. And every option has certain points attributed to them. And so say an example that you were mentioning that Amazon were to convert, or all the trucks coming to their facility were ZE, that in effect would make their points obligation zero. They wouldn't have an obligation to meet at that point, but they would still have to continue to report to verify that that is the case. And I would imagine if we went a similar route, we would do something similar in an ISR for San Diego.
Understood. Thank you.
Right. Let's see here. Great questions, everyone. And thank you so much, Randy, for being here today and presenting on this. And it's certainly not going to be the last time we hear about this. We certainly want to continue to engage on this topic in this committee. So thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
All right. And I know that Nick will be following up with more information. And Nick, I can work with you in sharing that out to folks who are interested in that as well.
Sure, sounds good.
I apologize, I'm getting over a little cold, and that's life with the 4-year-old that brings home something every other week. So I apologize if I have to take some moments to go off audio for a minute. So thanks for the great conversation there. We are gonna transition to the next part of the agenda, which is to really have a follow-up conversation regarding the various committees that folks have expressed an interest in being a part of. Can you all see my screen okay? Okay. And also, if this is difficult to follow along, the first link that I shared with you all has this particular slide deck that you can also follow along as well. At the last meeting, we had a really amazing and lively conversation at breakout sessions, breakout groups. And there were 4 kind of areas of interest, and all of them are areas in which you've all been helping to identify as part of the CAMP process, so the Community Air Monitoring Plan process, in terms of what are the key areas of priority for this particular CSC. And so what we did is we've grouped them in 4 broad categories. And the breakout sessions last week allowed for you all to start developing additional questions you might need to have answered in order to have better foundation and grounding on how to develop strategies around these issues. But you've also already started to identify some potential strategies for each of these items as well. And what we did is we began to document what you all shared. And I want to, let's see if I have it here. It says here on the website, the subcommittee notes. We have them in English and in Spanish here. So if you go to the website, and I'm going to drop this in the chat box so that you all have access to this. Let me find my chat box here. 1 second. You can actually click on this link that says subcommittee notes, and I'm just going to click on the English link. You can see documented what folks at each breakout session shared. So what were the key questions that they need help grounding? What are potential stakeholders they'd like to, that are important to include in the process? Already started to develop some strategies. And if there's any special care needed for any particular community. So each one of those things is listed. So heavy duty trucks, here's the questions, and so forth. I'm gonna go back here. So you'll be able to find that link if you go to today's date, subcommittee notes here. So these are kind of the grounding conversations that we had during the last meeting. And one of the things I wanted to start having the conversation today, and then I'd like to follow up with you all with the survey that you all can take to solidify the logistics of this, is we do know that a lot of these issues here are really complex and involved and are going to require the committee to meet more often than just our monthly meetings in order to dive in deep and trying to get answers to some of these questions in order to start developing strategies to really build out the SERP itself. So we're mindful of that, and we want to support you in as you begin to have your subcommittee meetings. Some folks at the meeting last month started to sign up for the various subcommittees. We also have additionally a subcommittee on community outreach and a subcommittee on accessible data in terms of monitoring data. These subcommittees are going to be on hold for just a second for the next few months, and we're going to really try to focus folks' effort in this group on these subcommittees. I'm going to drop this link in the chat, and you should all have access to it. I know that today I'm dropping a lot of links in the chat, but I want to make sure that the information is available at your fingertips as quickly as possible. I'd encourage you to go ahead and click on that last link. And if you haven't signed up for a subcommittee already, go ahead and take some time to write your name in one of these columns. If you'd like to be part of multiple subcommittees, you certainly can. It's really up to you where your interests lie. So I'd encourage you to please sign up if you haven't done so already, for a subcommittee or two that you're particularly interested in being more actively involved. So this is awesome. I'm seeing people sign up here. There's a bunch of anonymous animals up here. So thank you for doing that. So this is really going to help coalesce a group of folks, right, that will be working on these issues together. Again, I just want to reiterate, these are all things that you've all throughout the last several months have identified as these core areas of priority. It's not to say that these are set in stone. As you might be meeting in these subcommittees, you might identify other potential areas of interest or issues that you'd like this group to address as well. So I don't want folks to feel like these are set in stone and you can't add or modify these. You certainly can, but this is just a starting point. Okay. So there's a question, you know, what is a what will the subcommittee be informing, right? And we're going to learn a little bit about the Portside SERP from Domingo today. So that's going to also help provide some context on this particular slide. But the subcommittees are going to help inform and develop strategies, and strategies can include a wide variety of things. Strategies can include outreach and community engagement. It could include incentive programs. It could include rule development, enforcement actions, even advocacy measures, but it doesn't have to be limited to that. The subcommittees will also help develop goals associated with these strategies as well. Help to develop course of actions, like what tasks need to happen in order for these goals and strategies to be implemented. Help supporting developing timelines for when these goals should be met. And then also, you've already started this process already last time, identify agencies that would be tasked with implementing a particular strategy. It's amazing that we do have some of those agencies here today, like we have Shelby from the city of San Diego, we have Zach today from Sandag, Diane from Caltrans, but we do know, right, it's going to take also other agencies as well to be present at the table in order to make these strategies move forward as well. We'll be providing more guidance on this when you've had your first kind of official subcommittee meeting, but I just wanted to give you a high-level snapshot of what to expect in that space. So here comes my 4-year-old. 1 second. Mijo, you have to go over there, baby.
But I want to hug.
Okay, one hug. Come here, one hug. There you go.
I want to be all time.
Okay. Sorry, 1 second. All right. You can't resist a hug when they come in, but that's how you know he's up to no good if he's asking for a hug. Okay, so the subcommittees, that's essentially what they'll be supporting with, and this is just providing some general guidance in terms of the framework that the subcommittees will be discussing. Shelby, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, for those of us that represent organizations, would it be okay for us to maybe appoint someone from our organization to represent on the subcommittee? You know, somebody who may have a little more experience or connection to that subject matter?
I love that idea, Shelby, and I think that's really great, because then that person can help further inform, right, a lot of these key points. So, and also it might be a good thing, like if at all possible, had the capacity to do so, right, that maybe there's different folks from your organization or your agency specific, or the city of San Diego in your case, that could be on each one of those. That is kind of their area of expertise. That's a great idea. If you all have the kind of capacity to be in that space.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, but I knew I couldn't myself.
Yeah.
So as long as I can bring in help, yeah, we can try.
That's perfect. Yeah. And also I do want to emphasize, you don't have to be a CSC member in order to be on that subcommittee. You can also be someone who's actively involved in this space and support the subcommittee conversations there as well. Are there any questions on this slide here? This is just really kind of setting what's the framework or the expectations of what will be discussed in those subcommittee spaces. Other questions? Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and move us along. So we're not going to be able to answer all of these questions today, but I want to get some just general feedback from you all that's going to help me develop a survey that I'll send out to you all either tomorrow or first thing on Monday, so that to help you all coordinate when the best time your subcommittees could be meeting together as well. So first question is, have you signed up for a subcommittee? If you haven't, go ahead and get in this document and sign up for a subcommittee or two. Once you've taken the step, I'd like to hear from folks, you know, how often would folks like to meet? One of the things that we're committed to doing is during our in-person quarterly meetings to really dedicate that time for the subcommittees to do work together, right? However, those are only quarterly, and we know that even just more so than on a monthly basis, because the level of the amount of conversations that need to be had, it's going to take some time. So it might require meeting more than just in this space, and then also in the quarterly space. So love to hear from folks generally. And again, I'm going to put a survey out so that what you're sharing here is informing that survey. So it's not going to be set in stone today, but it's going to inform kind of that questionnaire I'll be sending out to folks. But how often would folks like to meet, or think how often should folks meet in terms of these subcommittees? In addition to thinking about, we're going to be meeting here once a month, but we hope to be using our monthly space here as a group to have conversations like we did today around the indirect source rule, to get presentations like Zach was talking about, to get answers to some of the questions the subcommittee is having. So in addition to these monthly meetings, how often? Mariano.
Yeah, I guess it just depends on what deliverables you're expecting from the subcommittees, right? Like, yeah, the list of questions or other things, but within a reasonable time frame, right? So if there's a certain set of milestones that would probably help to decide how often we should meet. It might be that maybe for the first one we meet twice a month, but then next month there may not be as many deliverables, so we only meet once a month. So it may vary.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And if I were to say what is the set of deliverables or milestones, I would reference this particular page right here, in terms of this is essentially at the end of the day what we'd like to have a good draft of, right? And then certainly APCD staff can support to round this out and all. But
Right,
these
but
would
are there like specific dates attached to these?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So if we're thinking about our overall timeline, we need to have the CERT finalized and sent to the California Air Resources Board by like January of 2024. Okay. So if we're working backwards from that, we essentially then would need to have some kind of like draft document, let's say by October of 2023. So what I would say is we'd want to, as much as possible, by I would say August, late August, early September, to have this as much solid as possible with the subcommittees itself. So we're talking about definitely. We're talking about probably about 4 to 5 months of time where the subcommittee be working through these things together. Jenny.
I was just thinking that you were saying you want to keep these meetings for presentations. And today's presentation was really great. But I'm kind of wondering, like at San Diego State, we're kind of flipping the classroom sometimes, where we have the people watch a pre-recorded presentation beforehand, and then they come to the meeting. So I'm kind of wondering, because it seems like getting people together is just really hard, everyone's schedules. And I'm thinking maybe we could carve out some time during these meetings and maybe have a pre-recorded presentation people could watch, and then have the person there to ask questions. Just to kind of, I just think it's so hard to get time to talk together.
Yeah, I really love that suggestion. I think that's something we can into integrating. I'd love to hear other folks' thoughts in terms of what Jenny's suggestion was. In terms of trying to use more of this space for those subcommittee conversations, and then making space for that by maybe having some of these really informative presentations that are directly related to these issues, right? Like kind of pre-recorded for folks to watch. Shelby, did I see you come off mute for a second?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I think I like that kind of even to the earlier point where there might be something that's that there's somebody else I'd like to get their input on. And, you know, usually in these, I have to then share it afterwards with them. And, you know, there's that lag. So I think there's a dual purpose there too, where we could come prepared with some questions or responses. If we're committed to watching the video earlier.
Yeah.
Which is hard to get people to do sometimes, but.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. I'd like to hear from Leslie or Dr. Lee or other members of the committee too, in terms of that idea.
I like Jenny's idea, and I think watching pre-recorded videos will be beneficial for us to save some time, and then we can do breakdown rooms and discuss this subcommittee subjects during the meeting. Yeah, I like this idea.
Okay, sounds good. So I guess maybe not that this would be like an official vote, but just to kind of get a sense of the room. It sounds like folks want to just primarily use this meeting, this monthly meeting time and space for the next 4 or 5 months, right? As we're in this stage, as like working group meetings, right? For the subcommittees, have the breakout groups. Because Jenny, actually, I hope you don't mind me pointing out, you did like message me in terms of like thinking about also interpretation being a challenge as well. And so if we could even like have the interpreter support the breakout groups, that might be something that could be helpful as well. But maybe just with a show of hands or thumbs up or something, what do folks think about that idea, is using this time again intentionally for the subcommittee and having this time more as a working group type meeting? And we'll have to like do the breakout rooms and all of that. Show of hands, do folks like that idea? Cool. Awesome. And I also like to see from folks too, there may be times in which maybe towards the end, right, that we're finding that, oh, we're getting close to this deadline, that we might need to find some time in between the monthly meetings to maybe have another meeting or two in between. And so I want to also not take that off the table, so to speak, but maybe on this front end piece, let's see how much we can accomplish during these monthly meetings. And have them exclusively be that way. I want to actually also, I know that we're kind of getting at time for this agenda item as well, but also love to kind of hear also Domingo's thoughts on that as someone who's been through this process before with another community.
Thank you, Monique. I really like that idea. I think that could be something that we can explore. And like you said, we have about 4 months or so. And I also want to be mindful that, because this is something that we experience in Portside as well. Months of July and August sometimes tend to be challenging for folks because of vacations during the summer. All of those who have kids in school and kids are out on vacation in the summer tend to take their vacations during the summer. So it might be just something to consider, that we might want to do the heavier lift on the non-summer months to make sure that most folks can participate. But yeah, I really like this idea, and it's something that we can start maybe giving it a try and then see how it's working, and then we adjust as we go. We can always course correct. So it was a great suggestion, I think.
Thanks so much, Domingo. And let's go to Wendy. Wendy, do you have a question or comment?
Sí, quisiera comentar que se me hace se me hace bien como que le dediquemos un poquito de tiempo a los subcomités en las juntas que tenemos mensuales presenciales. Las que tendremos presenciales, ahí se me hace que sería un buen momento para dedicarle tiempo a los subcomités, ya sea una media hora o algo así. No sé si todos los demás estén de acuerdo.
Sí, está muy bien, Wendy. Está muy bien así como piensas en los presenciales.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the feedback. No, thank you so much, Wendy, and thank you, Irma. Yeah, so like Domingo said, let's give it a try.
Gracias.
Let's give it a try. And we will set that up. We'll intentionally think about how to facilitate that and the breakout sessions at the next meeting as well, which is going to be in April. And then the meeting in May is actually going to be in person. So then that's also another great place, right, for those working groups to get some work done together as well. So with that, do folks have any other questions or comments on that? I think we have a pretty clear direction, but given we can be flexible if we're seeing that we need to spend a little bit more time just because of that deadline coming soon. Any other questions or comments on this?
Monique, I have a quick comment, just something that we also did import to that I think would be good to do here. Since a lot of folks would be interested in conversations that are taking place in multiple subcommittees, but not everybody will be able to be part of those conversations, right? I think it's going to be important to report out, to do some sort of general report out from subcommittees at a time where everybody's together, whether it's at the following meeting or at the end of a meeting of subcommittees, if everybody's together, but just wanted to point that out and share that for folks so that everybody knows that we'll keep everyone informed about what the subcommittees are working on.
That's a really great suggestion. So even just having some dedicated time at the end of every meeting or the next meeting, like you said, Domingo, that we're intentional, where folks are cross-pollinating and are sharing with each other as well. Awesome. All right. So I think we have a good plan. And like I shared with you all, if you're curious in seeing the notes from last meeting that we're going to be building upon, you can find them here on the website as well. And I did drop the link in the chat box. We'll also probably have to set up maybe some in the cloud share drive files that are working files for you all to be having access to, so that you don't have to be combing through this agenda or through this meetings list. So it's a little bit more organized for you all in one place as we start to build out those strategies together. All right, so I'm actually going to turn it over to Domingo. And Domingo, did you want me to use my screen for the presentation?
Yes, thank you, Monique. That would be great. And so, should I go now? Okay, thanks. All right, so again, I wanted to just share a little bit about some of the strategies that were adopted as part of the community emissions reduction plan that was developed for the Portside community that could be applicable or of interest for this community to include as part of your own plan or your own SERP. So with that, I'll just go ahead and get started. Monique, if we can go to the next slide. And what we did is we looked at some of the areas of concern that all of you highlighted in previous meetings, and then compared to, okay, what are some of the strategies or what are the actions that were adopted in the Portside SERP that could be applicable for this particular area of concern. So we kind of divided those based on that. So, we heard about vehicle traffic being an important area of concern for this group. So in the Portside SERP, one of the actions that we included was reducing emissions from passenger vehicles. And these are just very high level actions that I'm talking about, but under each action, there's an opportunity to develop more specifically, well, what would this look like? In this case, for this measure B2, which was included in the Portside SERP, it included you know, implementing incentive programs for people to access electric vehicles more easily. It including things like also incentivizing the deployment of electric vehicle charging technology for passenger vehicles. Also things like making transit improvements so that folks have better access to transit. Things like the projects that Zach was highlighting at the beginning of the meeting. So there are definitely a lot of opportunities that can be highlighted as part of this action, but this is one of the pieces. The other one was improving transportation efficiencies, which talks about not only transit, but also how our streets you know, designed so that, you know, we make transportation more efficiently in a way that it doesn't impact the community as much. You know, do we have dedicated truck routes that allow, you know, for transportation to avoid going through communities so that the impacts are reduced that way, etc. So these are just some ideas for vehicle traffic. Next slide, please. So we also heard a lot about impacts from our, you know, our neighbors from the other side of the border. What are some of the you know, some of the issues that were highlighted were sewage spills on the Tijuana River, also potential impacts from industry and air contamination from industry coming, you know, making its way across the border. We also heard about trash burning and the impacts of that. So as all of you know, that's not something that the agencies on this side of the border will necessarily have a jurisdiction over, but an important strategy that we included in the port side SERP that we can include on this one in particular is to support emission reduction opportunities through advocacy efforts, meaning you know, sending letters of support for legislation that would support emission reductions, or engaging with particular agencies where we don't have jurisdiction, but we can have a conversation, or we can raise you know, awareness of a particular issue, or just elevate the needs in a particular area. So that's something that that allows us to have a little bit more flexibility, or be more you know, opportunistic with whatever we see as a good way for us to engage in reducing emissions in areas that we don't have direct jurisdiction. So the other ones that we heard is, you know, mobile sources other than, you know, trucks and vehicles, which we already kind of touched on. You know, we heard concerns about off-road emissions, about airports, etc. So some of the strategies that could help there is looking at existing rules and considering new ones, whether it is rules for stationary sources that we in APCD oversee, or perhaps at the state level with our colleagues at CARB, at the California Air Resources Board, who regulate mobile sources. Is there an opportunity to inform efforts to regulate some of these sources, or to enhance rule enforcement? Another one of the measures is that we included in the other and portside SERP was to evaluate the current air quality complaint process at APCD. And a good outcome of that is that we did make do an evaluation of the program, and we made a number of enhancements to it so that folks have different avenues to let us know about their air quality complaints, so that our inspectors can then investigate. We have access to, now the public can have access to that program via phone, via email, via an app, and we have 24/7 service available for that. Another important measure was to look at land uses that served as a buffer between industrial and residential uses. So that's something that whenever there's, you know, there are updates to community plans, that's something that can be advocated for and be pursued. You know, looking at opportunities to design, you know, to look at those land uses in a way that it minimizes impacts to residents. So the other big piece that we heard as far as air quality concerns were from heavy duty trucks, right? So trucks that were coming, waiting to get across the border or just coming across the border and through San Isidro and Otay. So one of the strategies that I think was will be also a good one for the border was advancing the deployment of heavy duty on-road electric trucks. And that gets to the regulation that we mentioned at the beginning, that would be something that would sort of hurt this this goal that we have. So definitely keeping an eye out for those types of legislations and seeing how we can engage in conversations to make sure that that those goals are not that are supported with legislation and also with incentive programs. One of the programs that we, some of the programs that we implement at the district as far as incentive goes, allows for companies to apply for funding to support a transition to zero emission trucks. And so that's another thing that can go under this action. Increased number of truck parking and staging facilities with electric charging capabilities. Again, talking about zero emission vehicles and how we're supporting the infrastructure that is needed to see more vehicles like that on the road. Another one is reducing exposure for sensitive receptors near ports of entry and freeways and industry. So one of the strategies that was included in the port side SERP was to take a look at opportunities for barriers along the freeway that could help mitigate some of the effects of air pollution from the vehicles moving in the freeway to the communities adjacent to the freeway. So that's an example of that. Another one is for example, looking at how urban greening or other opportunities to help reduce air pollution over mitigating the effects of air pollution in near areas of people who are more sensitive to air pollution. Then when we looked about the sensitive populations and their location, prioritizing and quantifying health risks from air pollutants. This is an exercise that we partnered with the California Air Resources Board and the Portside community to complete, and it was basically taking a look at the emission inventories from the different sources of pollution in the community and developing a map that helped quantify, not a map, but I'm sorry, a model that helped quantify the cancer risk from the different sources of pollution and from the different pollutants in the community, so that then we can look at them and prioritize which are the pollutants that we should focus sooner or more to reduce, to help reduce health risk in the community. Also looking at implementing a residential filtration and air monitoring program. This is a program that we're actually currently implementing already in the Portside community, and it includes making indoor air quality filters and monitors accessible for the community. Again, just as a mitigation strategy. And also incentives outreach. How can we enhance our outreach to industry and other and just business in general about our incentive program, so that they can take advantage of the funding that's available to pursue greener technologies. Also increasing our presence in the international border community. We had a similar strategy in the Portside community where, for example, an issue there was also idling of trucks that were accessing the port. We've shared earlier during this whole process that we do have APCD staff frequently present at the Otay Mesa port of entry at the CHP inspection facility, inspecting trucks, but looking at other opportunities, what would those look like for having an increased presence of APCD in the community? As I mentioned before, also urban greening is an important one. And then public school exposure reduction. How can we partner with schools to do maybe a school flag program to alert folks when, maybe air quality is not so good right now, so that the kids, don't go out at that moment? Or how do we partner with schools for maybe deploying air filtration systems in classrooms that can help reduce exposure to kids while they're in school, etc. Next slide, please. And I think that's it. So if Monica, I don't know how we're doing on the agenda, but if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Irma? Irma, do you have a question?
Irma, ¿tiene una pregunta? Sí, Irma, ¿me escucha? Irma, can you hear me? ¿Me escucha? It looks like Irma might not be able to hear us for now.
Okay.
So,
So
maybe
we'll
we
go
can
ahead
go
and,
to another one.
for sure. Let's go to Alejandro.
No se escucha nada. No escucho nada.
Oh, okay. ¿Escuchas ahorita?
Ok, ¿puedo hacer la pregunta y ya
Sí.
usted? Sí, ok.
Sí.
Yo estaba mirando de que van a poner los filtros del aire por residencial. ¿Sería por casa en casa y en escuelas de salón en salón? ¿O cómo trabajaría esos filtros? ¿Cómo trabajarían en la comunidad?
Los filtros los filtros de los que estoy hablando en términos del programa que se incluyó en Portside son para
Pero no oigo nada.
Domingo, I think you need to answer in English
In
so
English.
the translator can translate it. If not, Irma's not
Okay.
gonna do it in the
All right,
Spanish.
I'm on the English channel. Can you hear the interpretation, Irma? Can you hear
No.
us okay? No?
No.
Okay, let me try and go
No.
to the Spanish channel. Irma, ¿me escucha?
Ahora sí ya, ahora sí ya.
Ok, voy
Ahora
a
sí ya los
contestar en
escucho.
español, entonces si me quieren interpretar en inglés. Irma, el programa del que estaba hablando era referente a los filtros, eran para residenciales. Entonces es un programa que distribuye filtros y monitores para el aire dentro de las casas. Para monitorear los impactos de la contaminación adentro de la casa. Y también el filtro es para reducir la contaminación del aire dentro de la casa.
Gracias, gracias, qué bueno. Eso es muy buena propuesta. Muy buena propuesta. Gracias.
Por nada, Irma.
And then I see Alejandro.
Yeah, I was gonna comment that I was thinking during while we were talking about the breakouts and subcommittees about specific strategies like that may not fall under any of those specifically, but we should still be thinking about. So I don't know. I was just trying to think out loud if there might need to be the creation of a specific committee that's doing strategies that are not paired with all the, because in the subcommittees, I think we're focusing on sources,
right,
rather than in strategies, which I don't feel like it's bad, but maybe like we should have another subcommittee or just so it doesn't fall under the cracks, those kind of strategies that we definitely want to hit.
Yeah, and as I was working with Domingo to prepare the slide deck, I noticed that there were those strategies, and I had to put kind of like just like sensitive communities or locations as like its own separate conversation, because a lot of those strategies kind of fall more under that. We could definitely have a another subcommittee, or what we could do as well is maybe that's something that we talk about as a group rather than having a subcommittee specifically for, because I think there's going to be a lot of crossover between all the conversations that are happening in each out of the breakout sessions. So maybe we just dedicate some time as we kind of format what our next meeting is going to look like. We have the breakout sessions, the feedback, and then we'll always have maybe a set aside time to talk about sensitive populations and locations that these types of strategies could then fall under. How does that sound, Alejandro?
Sorry, the bar keeps hiding, so I had a hard time unmuting. But yeah, that sounds good. I just, I'll be in some of the subcommittees, so I'll make sure to bring it back up again in case we feel like we're missing it. But yeah, for sure, that sounds like a good plan forward.
Cool. And one of the things that I do want to do in terms as a follow-up, and I'll have this ready for each of the subcommittees next time we meet, is each one of those things that Domingo shared, I'm going to actually pull it out from the Portside SERP, the actual like details of that language, in case you want to use that as a resource itself. So I'm going to actually have a document where I pull that out in both English and Spanish, have it categorized under those 4 different categories that Domingo was or 5 different categories that Domingo was going through in his presentation, so that you can also use that as a resource. So Domingo was providing really high level, but I'll get the details of what each of those sections, like what does section A2 include in it? I'll pull out the details of that information so that you in one like document, and I'll split it up per category so that it's an easy resource for you all to use as well. Domingo, anything else on this topic here?
No, just one last thing that I wanted to mention is that, these are good examples, but it doesn't mean that these are, the only things that can be done, right? So I don't want you to feel constrained by the examples that you see. These are just ideas, right? So it's about incorporating what you think will be good for your community, but also thinking about what, in addition to that, can also benefit the community. So just wanted to point that out.
Thank you, Domingo. That's a really good point. And to that as well, we've asked our partners at the California Air Resources Board to do a similar thing, to look at the SERPs that have been passed throughout the state and look at it through the lens of these different categories that we could also learn from other places outside of San Diego as well. And so they'll be sharing a document, and then based upon the guidance here today, I'll ask them to pre-record a presentation and see if that's possible but by the time of the next meeting as well. But Liliana, if you wanted to add to that as well, because I know you all been working on that right now.
Yes, for sure. Thank you so much. We heard the request at the last CSC meeting in February, and we're getting together some actions that I think I don't want to say could be transferable, but like the Domingo said, you can take inspiration from some of the actions in other SERPs and mold them into something that would fit this community specifically. So I really like the idea of the pre-recorded meeting, and I'm hoping to get a list and the pre-recorded meeting to you all soon, so that we can also bring the right people to the meeting in April, so that we have a productive conversation around some of those measures or SERP strategies that you all are interested in.
Thanks, Liliana. Alejandro, did you have another question or comment?
No, sorry, still from last time.
No worries, no worries. So what is exciting is that we really have a good solid foundation in terms of the work you all did last month the presentation that Domingo shared today, and even the presentation that Randy shared today as well in terms of the indirect source rule, and then the information we're going to receive from CARB before the next meeting. You all have a really solid foundation to start pulling and thinking about some strategies and ideas as well. So with that, I know that we're at 6:42, so we are actually right on time in terms of our agenda for the next item. And thank you all for bearing with us in terms of getting through each of these items today. We've got a lot to cover. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Let's see here. Whoops. Okay, can you all see my screen okay? I'll make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Okay, so what I want to share with you as well, last time when we met in person, Kevin, who is the senior chemist on the monitoring team, provided a presentation on the draft community air monitoring plan. Kevin couldn't be here today, but we also have David here today that also can support with any questions. There he is waving right there. Support with any questions today as well, but wanted to provide another opportunity for folks to chime in terms of any feedback that they'd like to provide in terms of the draft camp. I'm here on this website again because I want to direct your attention to several things. Kevin, I believe last week sent out the draft camp, and that could be found right here as well. So if you click on that link, you could find the draft camp, the supplemental documents as well, a fact sheet on the draft camp, and a really cool thing that Kevin did, and I think I sent this out the other day, is since the presentation was in person last time, Kevin actually took the time to actually record the presentation so that it could be a resource to you all as well. So I just put the link to the presentation in the chat box. And it's about a 15-minute presentation. So if you weren't able to listen to the presentation last time, Kevin helped us out by recording a presentation that he shared last time in person. The last resource that I do want to share with you, and I'll just provide the example in English here, but it's also, you can find it here where it says Camp Zine in English and Spanish. And I'll just share this with you all really quickly. One of the things we wanted to do is to make really accessible to everyone on the committee and also the community. This, I think it was like 30-some page document, and make it much shorter and much visual so people can understand the elements that are in the camp, the key elements that are in the camp. What does the camp do? What types of monitoring equipment is going to be out there? So we made a zine in English and Spanish. Again, the links are there. If you're having trouble with the links, let me know and I can make sure I get you a copy. We do plan on having these printed as well that we can share with you all in person, but I'll just kind of skim through it. It talks about what is a camp, what is this, the community steering or the community steering committee's role. What are the community identify air pollution issues? And then it walks through the issues that you've all identified that are helping inform where air monitors would be going. Also, and this information is all in the camp itself, but what we did again was try to make it visual and really community friendly and accessible. So looking at, okay, what are the sources of particulate matter in San Ysidro, Otay Mesa? What are those associated impacts? And what are the potential type of monitoring equipment that can be used to monitor particulate matter? So you'll see that for each one of these things and get some familiarity with the instruments as well. This is also in the camp. We just wanted to have it, shorter format, more visual, but how does weather impact air quality as well? So getting some information on that. And then where will potential monitoring sites be located? And what is the criteria being used in order to make that determination? And then what are the potential sites? what's the process for monitoring data? This is all also part of Kevin's presentation. So the instruments need to be calibrated, making sure that they're working properly, that there's samples collected. There's some lab analysis, some data analysis, and then sharing back out with the community. And then restarting that process again. Another thing that the camp has, if you're reading the longer document, it's also here as well. How does the camp inform future actions? So it's going to help inform the monitoring data is going to help inform the community mission reductions plan or program that we're developing. It's going to help inform exposure reduction, even maybe some land use decisions, rural development, additional monitoring, and ongoing community engagement. Here's more information on how folks can get involved in the CSC itself. And then some general information on how air quality concerns can be reported as well. So we have this digitally right now, digitally right now on the website, which you can find it here. And we also hope to have this printed out as well for folks to actually have a physical copy in the community. We wanted to provide this just to make sure that we're sharing information about the camp in a wide variety of ways so that it's accessible to a wide variety of people as well. Before I move on to this next section, I just want to see if folks have any questions or comments in terms of navigating the different resources and documents regarding the draft camp. Yeah, Jenny.
I want to be quick. I know we're getting near the end of time, but I just was curious. I was noticing in some of the sampling types that was being proposed that some needed, power in a really secure location, but some of them, like opening the vacuum canister and just grabbing an air sample, didn't. And I didn't see it in there if the monitoring locations had to all be the same kind of fixed site power monitors, or if you guys are open to grabbing samples like near the border crossing line and places like that, which are hard to monitor except with a real quick grab sample.
David.
Yes, Jenny, those are excellent questions. We're not married to any one type of monitoring program, so we're not anticipating that all the sites will be exactly the same. And so, depending upon the question that we want to have answered at that site, we will figure out what's the best way to answer that question, which for some sites it's going to be solar and battery powered instruments. Other sites it's going to be more plug-in power. If we are looking at VOC sampling, the canisters, we can do time integrated samples that can be collected over 24 hours. We can do snapshots. So we're really going to try to tailor the sampling program to the needs for that particular site, and trying to address the question that the community has with the best available technology.
Thank you.
Yeah, Irma. Irma.
Yo tengo una pregunta acerca de las estaciones donde van a hacer el smog. Ya ve que luego le aceleran y sacan mucho humo. Le digo porque así pasó con mi carro. Y ahorita pues sí me sale como 1,300 arreglarla para que pase el smog. Mejor la tengo parada. Pero en ese instante que estaba ahí, está blanco. En eso, ¿cómo se trabajaría? ¿También podrían un filtro, o a las personas, como en mi caso, que no puede pasar el carro, el smog? ¿Qué es la sugerencia que podemos, o cuál es la solución que podemos hacer? Si no tenemos para comprar un carro híbrido, que es ¿cuál es la solución más o menos? Pues mi solución fue parar el carro, dejarlo ahí, pero hay muchas personas que no les interesa de si andan, ahora sí, digo, estos van fumigando toda la carretera con el humo, porque es mucho humo y sí me ardió hasta la nariz, que le dije al señor, no, ya déjele así, está blanco el humo. Entonces, en esas estaciones, ¿cómo se trabajaría con ellos? Esa es mi pregunta. Gracias.
Yeah, and I didn't catch that on the English channel, but in really high level summary, and then Domingo, feel free to fill in, but
No más
Sure,
que no oigo
so-
nada.
but yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, Monique. It looks like an interpreter put the translation on the chat.
Ah, okay. I didn't see that.
And I wanted
Um,
to just quickly check, do we still have both translators? Because we're not getting translation in English.
I no,
Okay,
I don't
looks,
think so,
it looks,
actually.
okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. But yeah, so essentially in the chat, right? So specifically asking about like stations where there's smog at first, and then you know, really talking about car smog as well, and what is to be done you know, in areas where there's a lot of car smog specifically. And like essentially what can be done. And I just want to say that you know, that's exactly the types of questions, right, that we want to have as part of these breakout groups as well, in terms of thinking about strategies to maybe help support people transition away from those cars that are causing a lot of that like white smoke and smog as well. And so one of the strategies Domingo had mentioned in the previous presentation is even helping people you know, providing people some resources to make those purchases to transition away as well. So I think this is definitely a conversation that will continue. Alejandro?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to add, the answer is probably still gonna be the same, where like we're gonna discuss it in smaller groups. But I think she was also mentioning specifically where they do smog checks.
Oh, where they do
Places
smog
like that
checks.
as well, because they're
Ah.
constantly testing for cars, and you know there's a lot of cars that don't pass the smog.
Yeah, no, that's a great question of having those areas as well. So maybe also you know, I have up on the screen potential sites. So maybe even just looking at the areas, maybe helping inform maybe where those smog checks are happening. Could maybe be hot zones in a way, right? Because you're getting a lot of people coming in to do those smog checks. They're revving the engines and all of that. So maybe David, I'd love to hear your thoughts in terms of maybe having those as kind of areas to look at as well.
I mean, yeah, that's definitely can be something, trying to put some monitors there to look at that. I mean, that's something I've never thought about. It's actually a great observation that in certain areas, like, you know, certain businesses might attract higher pollutant vehicles than others, like, you know, the warehouses with the diesel trucks, but also, like you said, you know, the smog centers that are potentially seeing a lot of vehicles that don't pass smog.
Yeah, that's great feedback. What I have on the screen, just really quickly, is just where those potential sites, monitoring sites would be located. And if you're looking at the dots, it's corresponding with the different potential types of things that would be monitored at that site. The David and his team are going to be looking at these sites. Not all of these sites will have monitors. David and his team will have to look and see the site, making sure that it could accommodate those monitors. It's a safe site. It's a site in which, you know, for example, if it's at a school, that the school's okay with us locating equipment there as well. And so, David, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about kind of that process you all will be doing the next several months.
Yeah, so for sites, you know, the first off, every site we have to get permission from the property owner to be on site. Other sites are going to require availability of power, accessibility, And so those are all things that we need to look at to determine if a site is suitable. You know, for some of these sites in which have lots of dots on them, we're going to need, you know, considerable amount of power and space, whether or not that is available, whether or not if the site is suitable for the monitoring equipment that we want to put there, and do we have alternatives if it doesn't meet what we would traditionally think about putting it there. So those are all things that we'll be scouting out the area and talking to the landowners and the tenants of the properties and seeing if there's an opportunity to put monitoring sites at these locations, and then we'll report back what we find to this body.
Cool. Thanks so much, David. So right now the draft camp is being reviewed by the California Air Resources Board and they're providing feedback, but also it's open for you all as well to provide feedback as well. I think the smog comment tonight, I think, is something that could definitely be integrated into the updated version. So that was an interesting comment tonight. But if there's other things that come to mind, feel free to reach out to myself, David, or even Kevin, who I believe sent you an email last week with all this information as well. We hope to have something a little bit more finalized by April, May, but it's not to say that your feedback, even after it's kind of the camp is finalized, the draft is finalized, that your feedback can't further inform what the monitoring team is doing even after it's finalized as well. So it's not like once it's finalized, we can't continue to engage in helping inform how monitoring happens. We just want to say this is just a guidance document, and the conversation isn't closed. We're always open to kind of feedback in terms of how to inform monitoring moving forward as well in the community. So with that, David, do you have any last comments in regards to the camp?
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, additional feedback, reach out to us at any time. Even, you know, if we quote unquote finalize the camp, we consider it what we call a living document, meaning that we're always open to revising it, changing it as new information comes out available, as we start monitoring it, data and get that data in. You know, if there needs to be changes, we're willing to update those changes. And so just because it's, you know, here's the final version, it's not really a final version. We're always open to additional comments and changes.
Yeah, thanks so much, David. Really appreciate you being here tonight to answer those questions and hear the feedback as well. We'll be sure to share that with Kevin as well, who's more taking the lead in drafting that document. With that, I just want to, well, I know we're at time, but I just want to see if any folks have any public comments or announcements that they'd like to share before we head out tonight. Chris.
Yeah, so I sent you and Domingo a flyer, but at TruckNet, we're going to be having a zero emission ride and drive. So we're going to have, you know, hydrogen trucks, electric trucks. So if anyone's interested in coming down to the truck stop, we're one of the largest ones in Southern California, right on the commercial crossing between San Diego and Tijuana. Please come down on April 7th between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m.
Great, and I could definitely get that sent out to the folks on the listserv. Thanks, Chris. Alejandro.
Yeah, we're also, Casa Familiar is having a resource hub tomorrow, just showcasing our services and projects to the community at the Civic Center from 4 to 7 p.m. If anybody wants to come and check it out, you're more than welcome to. And I was actually gonna, what Zach put on the chat, that Sandag is launching a survey for specifically the San Isidro. Well, I'm actually guessing that's what he put in the chat, but about the San Isidro Transit Center, they're deploying a survey for feedback. So if anybody has a couple minutes to fill it out, I would suggest that you would.
Thanks, Alejandro. Any other public comments tonight?
No, I just want to thank Alejandro for the shout out. I put in actually, the first link that I put in the chat, if you can scroll up, is a link to a survey that we just launched related to the San Isidro Mobility Hub project that's ongoing. We're trying to get people's feedback about how they're currently using the site and experiencing the site. their perception, et cetera. And then the second one I put in is actually a heads up about a different survey that another SANDAG planning study will be launching pretty soon related to sustainable freight and goods movement strategies. So more on that. We could pass through APCD obviously and talk about it at the next meeting as well, but just to highlight those two.
Thanks, Zach. Appreciate it. All right. Chris, did you have something else to share? Cool. And thanks, Shelby. I see that you put also something in the chat box as well in terms of the sustainability talks as well. So thanks for sharing that, Shelby. So with that, what we have planned for the next meeting is going to be more dynamic in terms of we're going to have those breakout sessions based upon your feedback. We hope to have from CARB the document that's also providing information on the other SERPs throughout the state, and hopefully a presentation in advance to the working meeting, which is going to be really awesome because you're going to go into that space with so much knowledge that what's been shared here, and also that's going to be shared before going in that space. So that's going to be a really great meeting, and we'll make sure that we format that so that you have time with your breakout groups, but also have time to report out as well. And then also that making sure that we have a collective conversation, that we're setting time aside to also think about those sensitive population locations as well. So as always, thank you all. And we will be in touch with several emails from me. One, I'll send over Chris's flyer.
O me voy a enviar el volante.
Oh, and I hear Vicky on the English channel here. Sorry about that. Just letting you know. And so we will make sure we get that information out to you all. Again, if you have any feedback on the camp, or even if it's easier for you to connect with us via phone to share that verbally, we're happy to take that call and integrate that feedback. And like David shared this evening, even once the drafts camp is finalized, it's a living document. We're always going to want to hear from you all how our team could best do the monitoring work that will be taking place. So just want to say thank you and good night, and we'll be in touch. Looking forward to the next meeting with you all. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Buenas
Thank
noches.
you.
Buenas noches. Gracias a todos.
Bye.